We have been told a story, repeated so often it has become fact, that technological progress is a straight line, an unwavering march from the primitive steam boiler to the sophisticated electric car. School books and university lectures have built a tidy worldview where each new generation of technology is an undeniable improvement upon the last. But one need only look closely at the chronicles of the late 19th century for this perfect diagram to crumble. The cities of that era, be it Paris, Buenos Aires, or Moscow, appear before us as astonishingly clean, technologically advanced, and harmonious, at times surpassing the megapopolises that would emerge half a century later. Moving to the streets of these cities were not simple carts, but enormous, heavy metallic carriages filled to capacity with passengers. These multi-ton behemoths glided along rails with enviable speed and smoothness. But the most striking thing about their motion was what was missing. There were no horses to pull such a load, no plumes of steam, no black smoke, the inevitable companions of the coal engines of that epoch. And in what amounts to a nightmare for conventional historians, the skies above these streets were utterly clear. The suffocating web of cables and wires that would ensnare the world in the 20th century was completely absent. A logical question arises. What propelled these giants? What force set them in motion, if official science insists the internal combustion engine was then only in its infancy, and large-scale electrification was just taking its first timid steps? This depiction of reality, one that does not fit the accepted framework, uncovers what may be one of the most profound deceptions of the industrial era. It speaks of wireless streetcars, of technologies that, by all appearances, were deliberately suppressed to create a dependence on fossil resources. Official historiography attempts to offer an explanation, one that seems unconvincing under scrutiny. We are told these were common horse-drawn trams, and the absence of horses is merely a coincidence of the photograph. Yet in footage capturing this transport in motion, where the silhouettes of passers-by are blurred with movement, the draft animals are simply not there. Another popular version claims they were pneumatic trams, running on compressed air, or perhaps early experiments with electric batteries. However, before accepting these assertions as truth, one must turn to elementary physics and mathematical calculations, subjects the academic world prefers to tactfully ignore. For numbers have the power to shatter any beautiful legend. To move a carriage weighing 8 or 10 tons from a standstill and to guide it along a route stretching for tens of kilometers requires a force that defies these simple explanations. It demands we question not just the machine, but the very history that has been written for us. The power demands were colossal, seemingly impossible to meet with the technologies of the era. If we consider the possibility of battery power, a theory often defended by academic sources, we encounter an insurmountable technical contradiction. The batteries of the late 19th century were lead-acid constructions, cursed with negligible capacity and enormous weight. To propel a heavy streetcar, half of its usable volume would have been consumed by these batteries, transforming the vehicle into little more than a carrier for its own power source. Moreover, the charging time for such devices would have exceeded their useful operating time threefold, rendering the entire system an economic absurdity and a technical impossibility for the dense, mass transit schedules recorded in archival documents. It would not have been a functioning transport network, but a state of perpetual idleness, endlessly awaiting a charge. A similar paradox emerges with the theory of pneumatic propulsion. While systems running on compressed air did exist, their operation demanded a gigantic infrastructure, conspicuously absent from the urban planning of the past. A pneumatic network requires powerful compressor stations, generating pressures of hundreds of atmospheres. Yet, on the detailed city maps of that epoch, no such industrial facilities can be found. Beyond this, the physics of the process cannot be cheated. As the compressed air expands, pneumatic engines inevitably cool, covering themselves in frost and condensation. The process itself is accompanied by a powerful hiss and roar. Yet the memoirs of contemporaries describe the motion of the streetcar as uncannily smooth, and above all, completely silent. No clatter, no hissing of vented air, no clouds of vapor. And so, through a process of elimination, we are forced toward a startling conclusion. The autonomous power source was not within the vehicle at all. If the tram carried no fuel and drew no power from wires above, then the energy must have originated from the only place left in constant contact with the machine, directly beneath it. The solution to this enigma lies not only in the streetcars themselves, but in the very roadbed they traveled upon, a foundation whose complexity exceeds many modern highways. An analysis of the rail construction of the time reveals a baffling excess of metal, a strange and profound depth to its foundation. Engineers invested a degree of strength and material that seems entirely superfluous for a simple guide rail. It creates the distinct impression that the rails served a function far beyond that of a mere track, that they were, in fact, a complex electrotechnical component. A credible hypothesis emerges that this metallic grid served as a global ground, or perhaps the return circuit of a gigantic energy system, with the energy itself being transmitted through the path of least resistance. The history we have been told may only be a fraction of the truth, with the evidence of a forgotten science lying dormant just inches beneath our feet. The official narrative reluctantly acknowledges the existence of systems drawing power from below the rails, only to dismiss them as unreliable, vulnerable to the simple realities of dirt and water. Yet the historical record testifies to a different reality. These trams glided uninterrupted through torrential downpours, heavy snows, and muddy streets. Had this been a matter of primitive electrical contact, the first puddle would have paralyzed the entire network with a cascade of short circuits. This resilience points to a technology of a fundamentally different order. Those elements in the space between the rails, today dismissed as mere mechanical joints, may have been something else entirely. Induction coils, or resonators, embedded within the roadbed itself. In this paradigm, the tram received its energy through powerful electromagnet on an industrial scale. The road itself became the stator of a vast, unrolled electric motor, and the car merely interacted with the field it generated. This brilliantly explains the absence of heavy engines within the chassis, and their legendary, impossibly smooth ride. But if the energy was sourced from below, how was it converted into motive force? The answer compels us to lift our gaze to the strange metallic structures crowning their roofs, long misidentified as mere decoration. When we look up from the rails to the pinnacles of these enigmatic vehicles, an even more astonishing picture emerges, one that shatters our conventional understanding of technological progress. Museum placards and official schematics assure us that these intricate metal forms are nothing more than decorative elements, ventilation systems, or primitive lightning arresters. But a critical engineering analysis casts profound doubt on such explanations. Why would a city tram, navigating a canyon of tall stone buildings, require such massive and complex systems for lightning protection? And why are ventilation grills crafted into perfect spirals, spheres, and ornate combs that mimic, with startling precision, the diagrams of induction coils and resonant circuits found in radio engineering textbooks? What historians have labeled ornamentation may in fact be the functional nodes of a complex energy chain. These finials, resembling pine cones and chalices, could have served as receiving antennae and capacitors, tuned to capture an ambient etheric energy. If we allow for the possibility that the urban environment of that era was saturated with a modulated electromagnetic field, the tram transforms from a simple powered cart into a mobile resonator. It required no fuel to burn, no cable to pull. It suggests a world not powered by brute force, but by a subtle and elegant resonance. We may not be looking at the infancy of a technology, but at the silent, rusting relics of its forgotten zenith, a testament to a future that once was, and a history we have yet to truly understand. It needed no wires. The vehicle itself became part of a closed circuit, a link between the ionosphere, or perhaps emitters hidden on towers, and the Earth, grounded through the steel of the rails. It did not run. It sailed upon and in absolute silence. This principle may explain one of the greatest riddles of early tramway construction: the conspicuous absence of any visible power source. Inside these cars, one finds no massive steam boilers, no giant banks of batteries capable of moving 10 tons of steel. The undercarriages appear almost impossibly delicate, too slight to house the powerful electric motors of the late 19th century. The solution is as elegant as it is baffling. The engine was the vehicle itself. The entire structure was engineered to function as an induction coil, generating thrust through its interaction with an unseen, external field. We are looking at the technologies of Tesla, realized in metal on an industrial scale, yet masterfully disguised as common urban transport. An even greater challenge to the known laws of physics was posed by the so-called imperials, the double-decker trams that traversed the great cities of the world. Imagine a narrow-gauge track, often no wider than a single meter. Upon it rests a towering, heavy machine, its upper deck crowded with dozens of passengers. According to elementary mechanics, the center of gravity for such a structure would be critically, dangerously high. With any turn, or even a sudden gust of wind, it should have inevitably capsized. And yet, they moved with speed and grace, navigating sharp corners without the slightest hint of a list. The official explanations, of weighted undercarriages and heavy ballast, simply do not hold. To offset the weight of the upper floor, the base would have needed to be cast from solid lead, rendering the tram immobile. The only technical solution capable of granting such stability to an inherently unstable system is a gyroscope, a powerful flywheel, a hidden stabilizer, holding the vehicle upright in defiance of gravity. But the manufacture of gyroscopes requires the highest precision mechanics, perfect balancing, and immense rotational speeds. From where could such technology have emerged in an age when the pinnacle of mass transit was a horse-drawn cart? We are observing engineering that appears to be a century ahead of the accepted technological timeline. The silent glide, the lack of vibration, the instantaneous yet smooth braking described by eyewitnesses. These are phenomena possible only with the use of electromagnetic fields, or perhaps the manipulation of inertia itself. These were not machines born of the era they occupied. They do not align with the images of the men in simple work coats seen in old photographs with shovels in hand. And here, we arrive at a disquieting question. Could the people who merely rode these machines have possibly been the ones who built them? We are left to wonder if we are looking at the dawn of a new age, or the last, fading echo of a forgotten one. The official histories tell a curious tale. They insist that in the waning years of the 19th century, the world was seized by a sudden, inexplicable proliferation of tramway construction. As if by some unseen command, hundreds of cities across the globe, from the distant shores of New Zealand to the vast expanse of the Russian Empire, began to simultaneously lay down thousands of miles of steel track. But when this narrative is held against the stark realities of 19th century metallurgy, a profound and irreconcilable contradiction emerges, one that threatens to shatter the conventional timeline. This was an industry in its infancy, just beginning its transition from cast iron to steel. The Bessemer process, the engine of this new age, was only just gathering momentum. The production of high-quality steel remained an agonizingly expensive, labor-intensive, and limited commodity. And yet, we are confronted with the fact of cities utterly blanketed by these rail networks. The tracks stretch far beyond the horizon, piercing through residential districts, connecting industrial zones, and even linking neighboring towns. If one were to believe the official output records of the era's foundries, manufacturing such a colossal quantity of metal would have required the ceaseless, decades-long labor of every single smelting furnace on Earth. The mathematics are unforgiving. One cannot manufacture millions of tons of a product in factories that have yet to be built. There is, however, another explanation, one that reframes this entire chapter of history. These vast networks were not being laid for the first time. They were being unearthed. A close examination of archival materials documenting this so-called construction reveals a peculiar character to the work. We do not see the complex engineering process of laying ballast, crushed stone, and sleepers. Instead, we witness crews of men with primitive shovels, not building, but clearing. They are scraping away layers of earth, mud, and clay that have accumulated over ages. They are not constructing a new road. They are liberating a finished, perfectly level rail line that lay buried just beneath the surface. These workers bear no resemblance to the builders of a high-tech transporter, more advanced civilization, one lost to a global cataclysm in the middle of the 19th century. This theory illuminates other anomalies. It explains why the rail gauge across the globe was initially a unified standard, a feature of a single, integrated global system, only later to be chaotically modified into differing national sizes. And then there is the demographic paradox. Panoramic views of the era's cities showcase breathtaking architecture, grand avenues and colossal cathedrals scaled for populations in the millions. Yet the streets themselves are unnervingly vacant. In cities built with imperial grandeur, only tens of thousands of people reside. Why extend a sophisticated transport grid into distant districts where no one lived? Why dispatch trams at 5-minute intervals, only to have them traverse the city as empty, silent vessels? The empty streetcars roll on through silent, monumental cities. A silent testament, perhaps, not to the dawn of a new industrial age, but to the twilight of one that came before. We may not be the first to build this world of steel, but merely the inheritors of its ruins, mistaking an echo for an original song. The truth, it turns out, is terrifying in its simplicity. The transport system was already running on its own. It was set in motion long before the new settlers, our ancestors, were brought to inhabit these cities, to claim these ruins as their own. The streetcars continued to glide along their ancient embekoma, a mechanical ghost animated by a memory of life. Look closely at the archival photographs. The people, clad in dirty robes and caps, look utterly out of place. They are alien figures, set against the grandeur of antique facades and impossibly futuristic vehicles. They are not the creators of this world. They are its new occupants, struggling to adapt divine technologies to their own primitive needs, exploiting a power they cannot begin to comprehend. They arrive to find a world waiting for them, a legacy of clockwork precision. But these new masters possessed none of the knowledge required to command it. The complex electronics, the seamless automation, it was a language they could not speak. And so, they were forced to commit a kind of sacrilege, a barbaric intervention into the design of the machines. To understand the sheer scale of this technological regression, one must examine the so-called driver's compartment. It is here that the primary physical evidence is found, the proof of high technology being hacked by a lesser hand. A detailed study of the earliest, unretouched chronicles reveals a frightening inconsistency. At the very nose of these high-tech rail cars, where every rule of ergonomics and safety would demand a protected cabin, there was often nothing but a platform, open to all the winds of the world. As an engineering solution, it is an absurdity, if one assumes it was ever intended for a human operator. Picture the working conditions. Imagine a person standing on that platform through the brutal winters of the northern cities, St. Petersburg, Chicago, or Berlin. The operator would be forced to stand motionless for 10 to 12 hours, exposed to the freezing cold, under an icy wind made sharper by the motion of the transport itself. No windshield, no source of heat, nothing but a metal floor beneath their feet. From a physiological standpoint, this is not merely difficult, it is impossible. A human being would suffer from debilitating hypothermia or pneumonia within a matter of days. And yet, the chronicles record them. Men in uniform, clutching strange, crude levers and enormous wheels, the body of the vehicle. These primitive switches and mechanical brakes were clearly bolted on as a desperate afterthought, violating the seamless integrity of the original design. This profound disharmony serves as direct proof. These vehicles were never meant to be driven by human hands. They were unmanned. They were the drones of a bygone epoch, working in complete harmony with their urban environment. The system functioned automatically, obeying the unified rhythm of an electromagnetic network. The streetcars accelerated, braked, and maintained their intervals with an intelligence that was not our own. We inherited a world we did not build, and in our ignorance, we broke it just enough to make it work. We are the ghosts in a machine far grander than our memory can recall, forever turning the crude wheels we attach to it, believing we are in control. It answered not to the will of man, but to the signal of a field. A central processor, or perhaps a resonant frequency, once commanded its flow, eliminating the need for any physical link between the operator and the machine. But then, the central control signal was lost, disconnected. Unable to restore the intricate automation, its new custodians were forced to devolve the system, converting it to manual control. It was a barbaric hack. Mechanical linkages were brutally grafted into delicate electronics. Controls were ripped out onto external platforms, and a human was placed there, transformed into a reluctant bio-robot. His sole purpose, to open and close a circuit, a function once performed by the simplest of controllers. Only later, when the biting cold proved too much for human endurance, did they hastily erect those angular, ugly cabins, birdhouses of steel and glass, clashing violently with the graceful lines of the original design. We are witnessing the scars of a crude adaptation, where a near-divine technology was crippled just to make it serve the primitive needs of its new masters. However, even in this mutilated, simplified, and broken form, the transport system posed a colossal threat to the burgeoning energy market. The trams, though manually driven, remained too efficient, and most importantly, they were frighteningly independent. They required no coal, no gasoline, no fuel oil on an industrial scale, a fact that made their existence unbearable to those planning to build empires on the sale of combustible fuel. Free energy, even used at half its potential, was a recurring nightmare for the new tycoons. For the architects of the new financial system, the greatest enemy was not the complexity of these ancient technologies, but their absolute, defiant freeness. In a world being built on the principles of rigid market exchange and the accumulation of capital, the existence of energy matrix, this power could not be metered for a specific consumer. If the electromagnetic field was generated by the infrastructure itself, available along the entire length of the path, it was impossible to install a meter on an individual car. One cannot issue an invoice for the use of space. It was this economic impasse that became the death sentence for wireless transport. At the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, a strange substitution of technology occurs. Illogical from an engineering standpoint, but perfectly justified financially. Suddenly, as if obeying an invisible command from a single center, cities across the world began to string wires. The clear sky, which for centuries had been free, was now obscured by an ugly, sprawling copper net. A choice had been made, not for the most elegant solution, but for the most profitable one. And in that choice, we see how progress is not a straight line, but a contested path, often diverted by the simple, unassailable logic of who owns the power. It was presented to the world as a great leap forward, a long-awaited age of electrification. In truth, it was a grand regression, a colossal step backward. Humanity was forcibly torn from advanced wireless technologies, systems that operated on the principles of resonance, and shackled to a primitive, wired needle. Elegant, autonomous railcars, capable of drawing energy from the environment itself, were sent to the scrapyard. Or worse, they were disfigured, their graceful roofs scarred by crude, heavy pantographs welded onto their frames. The singular purpose of this transformation was control. A wire is a leash. It leads back to a specific power station, which belongs to a specific corporation. At that station, coal or oil is burned, a resource sold by someone else. In this new paradigm, free transport was converted into a dependent consumer. For if a streetcar is tethered to a wire, a meter can finally be attached. Kilowatts can be counted, and a bill can be issued. It is no coincidence that this period witnessed the flourishing of industrial empires, the creation of the central banking system, and the beginning of the global oil rush. These events did not merely coincide with the disappearance of wireless traction. They were intrinsically linked. Bankers and industrialists needed to sell a resource, not give it away. They required a perpetual payer, a permanent servant to the system. The creation of the wired network was merely the first stage. It allowed public transport to be monetized, to be made a component of the market economy. But even in this diminished, tethered form, the streetcar remained too efficient, too durable. It was still more reliable and cheaper than the internal combustion engines that demanded a constant tribute of gasoline, oil, and spare parts. And so, by the middle of the 20th century, it was decided that simple control was not enough. The streetcar itself had to physically vanish. Then, the true slaughter began. We have arrived at the darkest, most cynical stage of this historical tragedy. What began as technological degradation now escalated to physical annihilation. This was not, as the textbooks suggest, the natural decline of an obsolete technology. It was a planned execution, a vast and methodical purge carried out with cold calculation. History has a name for this crime: the Great American Streetcar Scandal. Yet, the geography of this process extended far beyond the United States. As if by a single command from an invisible coordination center, cities across the entire world began to systematically destroy their perfectly functioning transport networks. The scenario was identical everywhere, and it was frighteningly effective. Progress, it seems, is not always an arrow pointing forward. Sometimes it is a cage, meticulously constructed around a potential that was deemed too free for the world it was born into. From behind the veil of faceless holding companies, a new power emerged. It was the vast, unseen capital of industrial titans, the makers of automobiles, the suppliers of tires, the monopolists of oil. Aiding through a web of front firms, began a systematic acquisition of the nation's urban streetcar systems. But a strange paradox lay at the heart of this venture. These capitalists were spending millions of dollars not to develop their new assets, not to profit from public transit, but for a far simpler, more brutal purpose. They were buying their competition in order to kill it. Immediately after the ink on the contracts was dry, the dismantling would begin. It was an act that defied every law of a healthy market, yet perfectly aligned with the strategy of total conquest. The destruction of the streetcars resembled a barbarian procession, a ritual sacrifice to a new god of consumption. Carriages, many in perfect technical condition, with another half-century of service left in them, were herded into giant, desolate boneyards. No attempt was made to sell them to other cities or to countries in need of transport. They were not stripped for parts. They were doused in gasoline and set ablaze. The skeletal remains of hundreds of cars, stretching beyond the horizon, twisted into scorched metal. They were annihilated with a manic hatred, as if they were not soulless machines, but living witnesses to a crime that had to be silenced forever. The ultimate goal was to erase the very memory of reliable, durable transport and replace it with a pale imitation. In place of the enduring streetcar came the bus. Newspaper headlines heralded an age of progress and maneuverability, but the reality was far more crude. Instead of the smooth glide of steel on steel, passengers were given rattling, foul-smelling boxes powered by internal combustion. The lifespan of a bus was 5 times shorter than that of a streetcar, which was precisely what its manufacturers intended. The streetcar, in its profound reliability, was an economic liability. It simply refused to break down often enough. The bus, however, was the ideal consumer. It was perpetually thirsty for new tires from Firestone, for gallons of gasoline from Standard Oil, for replacement parts from General Motors. An entire populace was driven into an endless cycle of consumption and repair, and it was sold to them as freedom of movement. But while the streetcars could be burned, the tracks presented a more stubborn problem. Thousands of miles of high-quality steel could not simply vanish. To excavate them would be too costly, too time-consuming. And so the new masters of the landscape chose a simpler solution: to hide the evidence. The fate of these steel arteries was no less dramatic than that of the vehicles that once ran upon them. In the vast majority of cities, the rails were never removed. They were simply entombed, paved over with asphalt. We walk and drive over the bones of a buried civilization, utterly unaware of what lies just inches beneath our feet. A silent testament to a future that was not lost, but deliberately taken. They chose not to dismantle, but to entomb, to turn the arteries of a thriving world into a vast sarcophagus. The great iron causeways were simply paved over, swallowed by asphalt. Today, we walk and we drive upon the bones of an older, more advanced civilization. Beneath the layered tomb of gravel and bitumen, under the grand avenues of New York, of Paris, of Moscow, a colossal metallic web lies dormant. Millions of tons of high-quality steel, sealed away, entombed while it still lived. There is a theory that this act was not merely utilitarian, but one of profound physical consequence. If one views this rail network not as simple transport, but as a vast grounding grid, an integral part of a planetary energy system, then covering it with a net. By sealing the conductor within an insulator, the architects of a new order severed the circuit. They effectively turned off the cities. They transformed an active environment, capable of generating and transmitting energy, into a passive, concrete desert. The cities stopped breathing with the ether. The very space around us, once saturated with electric potential, went silent, dead. We live on ruins of our own making, cementing over our inheritance, while mistakenly believing that each new layer of asphalt is a mark of progress. In truth, it is the seal of our own degradation. This destruction was not merely technical. It was a sweeping operation to re-engineer human consciousness itself. We were made to forget a fundamental truth, that energy can be a gift, not a commodity. The psychology of the consumer was surgically implanted where the spirit of the creator once resided. And so the modern human accepts it as normal to pay for every kilowatt, to sit in traffic, breathing exhaust fumes, to spend a lifetime servicing a machine in exchange for a counterfeit freedom, a freedom paid for in the financial slavery of insurance, loans, and fuel receipts. They sold us this illusion only after taking away the effortless public transit that once worked in harmony with the laws of nature. The supreme irony is that after a century, we are spending billions to build light rail transport, struggling to create a shadow of what we already possessed in a far more perfect form. We are attempting to reinvent the wheel, while staring at the blueprints of a starship we can no longer comprehend. Those old technologies, founded on principles of resonance and harmony with the planet, seem lost forever. The engineers who held the secrets to tuning these systems have vanished. Their documentation has turned to ash. All that remain are faded photographs and a vague, unsettling anxiety, a phantom limb, a genetic memory that whispers of how our cities ought to be. Quiet, clean, and impossibly swift. But sometimes, the past pushes through the thin veneer of the present. Every spring, as the snow recedes and the asphalt cracks under the strain of the thaw, the old world reaches for us, a metallic ghost pressing up from below. From the deep pits, from the scars etched into the roads, the rusted iron emerges. This single ancient rail lies exposed, a monument, not to what was built, but to a profound deception. It is a silent testament to an incredible future, a future that was stolen from us all.